Welcome to Alchemy Uncensored, a podcast presented by Alchemy Search, a team of professional financial and tax recruiters. Our podcast is dedicated to providing valuable insights into the financial and tax sector of the UAE by discussing the challenges and opportunities faced by employers and job seekers. Alchemy Uncensored is the perfect podcast for those looking to gain a competitive edge in the finance, accounting and tax industry of the UAE. Stay informed on the latest job market trends, developments and conversations to stay ahead of the game. Tune into our podcast to be part of this insightful conversation. Hello, fellow alchemists. Thank you for listening to the podcast thus far. 2024, big year ahead. The one favor I would ask, if you can, if you're enjoying what you're listening to, is to press the follow and subscribe button on whatever media platform you listen to us, as it helps us grow our network and grow the podcast. So thank you and enjoy the podcast today.
Hi everyone, I'm Pooja and I specialise in accounting and tax recruitment at Alchemy Search. In today's episode of our tax series podcast, I'm very excited to welcome guest speaker Vishal Sharma. Vishal is Managing Director and UAE Tax Practice Leader at global management consultancy firm Alvarez Marsal. In his role, Vishal will be helping to build out A&M's tax capabilities across the UAE and Middle East region and partner with clients in navigating the ever-changing tax landscape. Prior to joining A&M, Vishal was a mergers and acquisitions tax partner at Deloitte Middle East, where he spent the last 9 years after relocating from the UK in 2014. In today's episode, we will be covering topics from Vishal's recent appointment at Alvarez Marsal, insights into current tax landscape and what companies are commonly looking for advice on, the increase in demand for an in-house tax professional and what this means for tax consultancies, why KSA is an attractive place to be, and the future of tax technology. So, hi Vishal, welcome to the podcast. First of all, Happy New Year. How was your Christmas? Did you spend it here in Dubai or did you travel back home to the UK?
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. No, I spent it back home in the UK, so I went back for the holiday period. It was great, getting to see family and friends and, get some of that Christmas spirit. It was utterly cold, so from that perspective, I'm definitely glad to be back in Dubai and enjoying the nice weather.
But I do feel that Christmas has to be cold. You have to be wearing your jumpers to celebrate Christmas, in my opinion. So,
for sure,
I definitely agree with that. So, cool. Yeah, congratulations on your new role.
Thanks.
I feel like you're a bit of a celebrity, actually. When I came back from maternity leave in October last year, I was obviously on LinkedIn and kept seeing on my newsfeed your new role at A&M, and I was like, wow, I feel like you're a celebrity. So I was a bit nervous reconnecting with you. You're managing director of A&M. So yeah, congratulations. How is it going for you? It's been 6 months now?
4. So
4 months.
Actually, not even. Yeah, it's been much 4 months.
How's it going?
It's certainly been a fast start, to say the least. I've definitely been more active on LinkedIn than previously. First time ever someone's called me a celebrity, so yeah, it's always a first for something. But no, yeah, we've definitely had a fast start, and I think A&M are on a global expansion at the moment. So I think the names coming up in different markets, and so you both may have heard in terms of Australia, Germany, Asia. There's big growth plans across multiple markets where A&M are hiring vast numbers of tax professionals, predominantly from the big four, people that are known within the market and kind of, are well regarded. And so that in itself is causing a lot of noise itself. So I wouldn't say it's down to me in myself, but yeah, there's definitely a lot of noise.
I'm sure a lot of it is down to you as well. So yeah, I remember when we met a few months ago, you were saying, I'm not sure who's going to join me in this journey. So can you give some insights into, what your original plan was in terms of your team size and what your team size is looking like now?
Yeah, so when I moved across, I was obviously employee number 1 for A&M Tax Middle East. Obviously, A&M Tax is a global US tax consultancy firm and has kind of operations, big operations in the US and UK. Started to venture in other markets like Netherlands and Germany. Middle East was next on the agenda. When I first came across and, had my business plan to kind of set out the practice, the plan was really to kind of initially start with, some supporting big A&M. So big A&M is effectively our consulting business. So our transaction advisory group, our restructuring, our strategy and performance and improvement group. So there's a lot of elements that kind of, requires tax elements. So the initial plan was to build a team that could also support existing clients that big A&M are serving. However, obviously with, introduction of corporate tax here in the market, and I was pleasantly surprised actually to see how much interest there was from high quality candidates wanting to join A&M. So I kind of ripped up that business plan and then suddenly went back to our kind of global leadership and said, look, we're seeing a lot of interest locally in the market from some really high caliber individuals. And as we've done in multiple markets, the point was, go ahead and proceed and, bring in the right type of people. So we've gone probably double over plan at the moment. So,
wow.
So
that's
it's
amazing.
been, growing quite big, quite fast.
So when you joined, you had a plan of X number of headcounts that you want to get to. And you mentioned that you actually exceeded that and you've doubled. So what does that headcount look like now?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the number is changing every day. Last night someone accepted, and again this morning I heard from one of my other guys another accepted. So the numbers changing quite a lot. But now we've got over 32 people, I think,
really?
Within the team. So
okay.
Yeah.
And do you have a number by the end of 2024? What number you want to get to?
Like I said, we kind of went over plan in terms of what we initially. I think it's all about if the right candidates kind of present themselves, then we'd always consider it. I'll be honest with you. When it came to, we did a recruitment in terms of initiative on LinkedIn, and we received over 2,500 applications.
Really? Did you go through all of them?
No, we didn't. So, luckily I've got a great team back in the UK that has kind of helped with that. But in terms of, we've actually hardly even touched any of those applications, unfortunately. So, unfortunately or fortunately, but I do feel quite bad actually, because again, after that post went out, I had a number of people message me on LinkedIn, and I just didn't have time to, respond personally back to every
because you're a celebrity, like I said.
Always say that. But again, I do feel bad about that. So if anyone's that's listening and I haven't responded back, that's not out of me. Not as a kind of indication on you as a person. It's very much that we just received an overwhelming amount of applications. And in terms of moving forward, it's really, if the right candidates present themselves, then of course, we'd kind of be interested.
Okay. So if there's any candidates out there who you haven't replied to, they can come to me. Maybe I can bring them to you then.
That sounds good. Yeah.
Good. So as a tax team, are you covering all aspects of tax, the direct side and indirect tax side?
Yeah, so we're a fully fledged tax practice. So we cover all disciplines. So it's corporate tax in terms of compliance advisory, indirect tax compliance advisory, transfer pricing. We also have, an M&A tax group that solely focuses on M&A tax engagements. Okay, cool. We also kind of expanded in some other niche areas as well. So, we've got individuals that focus on tax policy, US tax, and also reward incentive planning.
Okay, cool. So you've been in the region for 10 years. Did you ever think corporation tax would be implemented?
Yeah, you funny say that. Actually, I joined in 2014, and I joined across from Deloitte at that time. When I moved across, people were saying, why are you going to the UAE for? There's no tax there. Of course, there was tax for, extractive businesses in terms of oil and gas and, branches of foreign banks. But apart from that, all other businesses were not subject to any form of taxation. So a lot of my partners in the UK are saying, why are you moving to the UAE for? At the end of the day, initially it was a 2-year secondment plan with the view to go back. Okay. And they said, look, at the end of the day, you're going to a regime that has a benign tax regime. You're going to come back. You're going to be so much further behind your peers. But I think in terms of, when I moved across, there's always noise about corporate tax being introduced. But my role at the time was very much focused on doing M&A transactions across the region. So countries like Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, Qatar, Oman already had taxing regimes in place. So it wasn't quite, as sitting on a beach in terms of it is very much kind of hands-on.
Yeah. So I've been specializing in tax recruitment for 3 years, but I feel like now it's getting really exciting. We're definitely going to see a lot more roles come up in 2024. So Yeah, are you seeing a change in the appetite from CFOs that you speak to in, their attitude towards tax? And are you seeing an increase in, these companies wanting to hire an in-house tax professional?
Yeah, so like I say, with obviously the various tax reforms, but also new taxes being introduced, you would probably seen back in 2018, like you said, when you obviously came across, when VAT was introduced, there was a requirement for businesses to start hiring in-house tax professionals. Now we're seeing, again, a much more kind of impetus around that. I mean, CFOs themselves are obviously adapting because of changes to the legislation and requiring in terms of more skilled tax professionals, supporting in terms of not only managing risk, in terms of meeting compliance obligations, but also looking at areas of tax efficiency that could be obtained within the business, and aligning strategy with obviously the various tax needs as well.
So how does that make you feel if CFOs are now hiring a tax professional? Will that change how much the percentage of work that's being taken outside to consultancies, or does that make you feel relieved that you'll be now speaking to a tax professional rather than maybe someone in the finance team who doesn't have that same understanding of tax as a tax professional would have?
Yeah, and it's a good question. I mean, you would automatically think that if they hire in-house tax professionals, that's going to stop professional services firms like ourselves kind of getting an increased amount of work. But I think actually it'll be the opposite. So it's a much welcome news that organizations are looking to add to their in-house tax functions, because ultimately they're able to they see the value that we can bring as professional services advisors. So historically, tax has always been seen as a compliance burden or a check the box exercise. In fact, it can bring a lot of value to businesses, and so it's changing that mindset. And as, like I said, there's change in the landscape. There is now, in terms of a fundamental shift in the tax ecosystem. So again, I've always, it's always good to interact with in-house tax teams because they understand the speak that we're talking.
Yeah, same language, I
exactly,
guess.
yeah. So, and so when we're scoping pieces of work out, they understand why we're scoping it in a certain way, what value we can bring. So I see actually, it's a positive as opposed to any sort of disadvantage of, companies hiring in-house tax professionals.
Okay. So in the roles that we typically see when we're hiring for an in-house tax professional, it always seems to be a need for someone who has transfer pricing experience. So not a core TP person, but somebody who's had a bit more of a general experience, but definitely the CFO is looking for transfer pricing. So for those people, listening to this podcast and they don't come from a tax background, why would TP be so important for companies now?
Yeah, so it's a good question. In terms of transfer pricing, it's not a tax in itself. It's a very much a concept of taxation, which applies to a direct tax regime. So with corporate income tax being introduced, there's various transfer pricing regulations that are now, in terms of businesses, will need to comply with, in terms of making sure that any transactions between related parties are being done on an arm's length basis. Also, in terms of making sure that such transactions are documented, so they're using the right pricing methodologies and policies being applied. Historically, within the UAE, because there has been no tax, there's businesses would often, you've seen a number of instances where one business will pay in terms of some services on behalf of another service, but it's not the one that's benefiting from that service itself. And ordinarily, that should be recharged back to effectively the company that is benefiting from the service. The other aspect is, with the various nuances of the UAE corporate tax regime, obviously you've got a free zone regime at 0%, you've got a mainland regime at 9%. Also, potentially in the future, you've got the Pillar 2 rate that will come in. So there's various different arbitrage that can be obtained in the different rates that you look at. So again, transfer pricing, you may have seen, 5 to 10 years ago in Europe, there was a lot of well-known, global multinationals coming under heavy scrutiny around how they manipulated in terms of their intergroup transactions, such that they were shifting profits from high taxing jurisdictions to low taxing jurisdictions. So here within the UAE, where you've got effectively 0%, 9%, 15%, there could be a scenario where companies do look at in terms of how to manipulate their kind of intercompany related transactions to, make things more efficient from a tax perspective. And obviously the corporate tax rules and the transfer pricing rules will kind of kick in to make sure that that doesn't have in place. But it is a concept to make sure that, fair taxation across the board. So you tax profits where they're generated and where value is created. And so as part of the corporate tax regime, it was, only sensible for transfer pricing regulations to come in as part of that. And now, like I said, CFOs, as part of hiring someone in-house, they want people that have done corporate tax, have had transfer pricing, expertise, and also VAT. So those people that are looking for roles within in-house roles are the ones that, would have a broader knowledge of all taxation.
Companies who are, predominantly operating within the UAE, even within Dubai, with the different free zones, they are still, they still have to take TP into consideration, because I think a lot of the times people think, oh, we're not a regional player, we're just, we operate here within the UAE, so TP, whatever that is, that doesn't apply to me. But like you just said, there are things to be aware of. So definitely tax is something that everyone should be thinking of right now.
Yeah, so transfer pricing in the UAE, the rules apply such that it applies to domestic transactions as well as international tax transactions. So in some countries, transfer pricing will only kick in where you've got a transaction between a group company that is in another jurisdiction, whereas here it applies domestically between kind of two UAE companies as well. So that is obviously expanded the scope of transfer pricing, and it's important that businesses, like I said, ensure compliance with the regulation, ensure that they have appropriate documentation to support, that the arm's length pricing that they have taken.
Okay. So how do you find the local UAE legislation versus the UK or Europe? I know there's a lot of, when I'm on LinkedIn and I see, on a Friday, new legislation has been released or there's been an update. So a lot of my tax network are saying, why are you always releasing the legislation updates on a Friday? We want to spend time with our families. Especially one person in our tax network recently made that comment, which I think everyone was laughing at. So yeah, how do you keep up, and how does the legislation compare to back home?
Yeah, I mean, I secretly think the FDA and the ministry get a kick out of, releasing legislation or updates, obviously on Friday afternoons. I've seen it back in 2018 or 2017 when the VAT regulations were introduced. It happened.
Did they do that back then as well?
Yeah, quite close to the holiday period. And in fact, obviously Saudi as well, they've got their public consultation, which is due for submission on the 25th of December, so
really?
Not too long to go. So yeah, I do kind of chuckle when you see those announcements being made just as you're about to kind of switch your laptop down.
Well, maybe they're thinking, well, it gives you 2 days to read through it and try to figure it all out. Yeah. Maybe they're being kind.
It could be, yeah, right. I mean, in terms of how it compares to UK legislation, it's quite similar. So the principles, are very interchangeable. So, particularly those practitioners who have practiced and studied tax in the UK and also the Netherlands, because there's also quite a lot of overlap there. So when all the regulations came out and when the guidance is being released, having read through it, it's kind of like, that makes sense. I can go, I can relate to that because it's kind of, the principles that have been adopted in say, well-known taxing jurisdictions. So, but like I mentioned before, there are certain nuances related to the UAE in terms of the free zone and mainlands. So again, that's where I think there's still a lot of open questions. So it's not, a clear-cut answer in most instances. And I think certainly businesses and clients that we speak to are still saying that there's a lot of kind of ambiguity still there. We still need support in terms of understanding how this is going to practically apply to their business. So the way I typically try to look at things when I'm obviously interpreting the UAE legislation is, in some respects, going back to my UK tax books, going to HMRC manuals, going to UK case law, interpreting, those particular, whether it's kind of, items and saying, look, how is that being treated from a UK tax perspective? What precedence is available? and using that as a basis to say, look, okay, we may not know the answer right now, right here, in terms of from a UAE perspective, in terms of how the FTA may interpret things, but this is how it's interpreted in the UK or Netherlands or in other kind of, sophisticated and well matured tax regimes, with the view and hope that if the point ever came up, we could, engage into dialogue with the FTA and say, look, there's obviously precedents elsewhere that we can rely on that has similar fact patterns, and therefore give clients, more clarity in terms of how to move forward in certain instances.
Okay, interesting. So what kind of advice are you typically, getting requests from your clients on to advise on? Is there a common theme that you're seeing? I guess coming from an M&A background, like that is your area of specialism, but is there anything else that companies here in the UAE are, looking for advice on more so than any other area?
I'd say probably transfer pricing, okay. That's a key area of focus, because again, a lot of businesses have just not given thought to how to, one price intercompany transactions. So that is, again, a lot of what I'm seeing in the market as well, as businesses are starting to do corporate income tax assessments. In some instances, they're just doing corporate income tax assessments on their own. They're not kind of coupling that with transfer pricing assessments, and that's what should happen. And so that is an area that I think, is a big focus. The other area, which is tax accounting. So again, I remember from my days in the UK when, the concept of deferred tax came up, you'd see, tax professionals run for the door, because it is a very complex kind of area where you're looking at an accounting concept and applying, tax principles to that. And I think particularly here within this region, even, the finance teams, because they've never had to kind of, pay tax previously, the concept of deferred tax is quite new, and therefore it is quite a kind of challenging area to get your head around. So I think, transfer pricing, deferred tax are definitely, the two areas that are often being questioned when we're doing, projects with them.
Okay, interesting. Okay, so recently there was an announcement about the KSA tax holiday that they're offering. So just wanted to understand your views on that. What does that mean for companies who are, considering relocating their headquarters to KSA? What are your views on the tax holiday?
Yeah, so obviously, Saudi Arabia is going through a period of, transformation, both economically and socially. I think everyone is just talking about Saudi Arabia at the moment. You see, obviously previously there's a lot of noise around Vision 2030. You've got the giga projects in terms of Project Neom and Qiddiya. You've also got the World Cup going there in 2034, and then in terms of also the Expo. So there's a lot of attention on Saudi at the moment, because there's a lot of projects, big projects that are underway. Obviously, the RHQ program that was recently introduced, again, another program which was aimed at ensuring that businesses that operated regionally had their HQ in the kingdom. And so particularly those businesses that do business with, state-owned organizations. So with the announcement of the RHQ program, and obviously having a tax holiday announced in terms of a 30-year tax holiday to exempt any people from corporate tax or withholding tax, I think is a welcome news. It'll definitely attract in terms of a number of regional HQs to move their operations to Saudi. Like I said, the economy is booming at this moment in time. There's a lot of spend going on, a lot of projects, a lot of work out there. So a lot of organizations have and are considering to move their regional HQs. And what does that mean? That means moving, key decision makers, people, having more substance in the kingdom. So I think that fly out model is kind of becoming less, and the normal more being in terms of having a fully fledged kind of practice in the kingdom. But I think, like I said, tax does change behaviour, and so as soon as you offer a tax holiday, obviously, it becomes attractive for some organisations to, consider those type of tax benefits.
Okay, so we have, I think we're going to see a lot more of an increase in demand for tax professionals from a recruitment point of view needed in Saudi. I still get a bit of pushback from candidates wanting to actually relocate to Saudi. But like you said, there's so much happening there. And I think it's a really exciting time to be a part of, what's happening in Saudi. I think come 2030, maybe it's going to be the place where we all want to be. So I think if you do get an opportunity coming your way from a recruitment point of view, I definitely wouldn't shy away from it, because I think there's a lot of learning to be, done in Saudi from from your career point of view. So yeah, like what are your views for candidates who are not so keen to relocate to Saudi, and everybody always wants to come to Dubai? What would you say, to those candidates relocating from other parts of the world, wanting to come to the Middle East? Like, why should Saudi be on their radar?
Yeah, I think Saudi has changed massively over the last 5 years. I remember when I used to travel quite a lot in terms of pre-COVID. There was, I would say it's a little bit behind in terms of the UAE, in terms of from a business perspective, an opportunities perspective. But things have changed massively. And again, after COVID, when I went to Riyadh and also Jeddah, it's a different place. And I think a lot of people, I've heard things in the past around, living in Saudi and etc. But it's nothing like, what the media says, or in terms of what people kind of portray Saudi to be. It's actually, so much more forward thinking nowadays. And like you said, in terms of the projects that are ongoing there, that will only give candidates, amazing experiences in terms of professional growth, because the size of those projects, the high profile nature of those projects, can only kind of add value to a candidate when kind of at the early stage of their career, or even at their end of their career. So we are seeing a lot of interest in Saudi actually nowadays. It's no longer, an immediate shut the door type of kind of, point. It's very much, they are seriously considering it, and that's again a shift in what we're trying to see.
Yeah, so I went to Riyadh in May last year, and I didn't know what to expect. I mean, I had no expectations, but I was really pleasantly surprised. I mean, all the nice fancy restaurants, fine dining restaurants that we have here have opened up there. The malls, I mean, I love shopping, so yeah, the malls were like amazing. We actually viewed a couple of compounds just out of interest to see what it would be like. And it was really cool. Like, it was really modern facilities. Compound life I think it's quite fun, especially if you have a young family. The only thing that put me off was the traffic, but hopefully, that will change in the future. But yeah, no, I think definitely Saudi is one to watch out for in the next year or so. I think we're going to see a lot more from Saudi, so that's really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you get traffic here as well, right?
Yeah,
so
true.
It's not as bad, but I completely agree. I mean, like I say, even you look at the Red Sea development, you look at, I really like Jeddah, to be honest with you. Jeddah's
I've not been, but I've heard it's quite really funky
beautiful.
and cool.
Yeah, it's a really beautiful place. The weather's actually better than Dubai as well,
really?
because it's a little bit cooler. So
Okay.
That's something to consider. But in terms of, like you say, the opportunities there are endless. And I think if I look back at my own career here in the UAE, I've managed to progress quite far, mainly by being thrown into the deep end on some of these large projects here within the region. And with this transformation happening in Saudi, being part of those projects will just, like I said, give so much exposure, so much experience to doing things that you'd never do in some of the other kind of, Western markets, should I say.
Yeah. So just like your peers said to you back in 2014, why are you going to Dubai? That's probably similar to what we're going to be saying to people who've made the move to Saudi and, took that risk and moved now. And in 10 years' time, we'll be saying, why, look at you now. Look where you are in your career, because you took that risk and moved to a country that maybe wasn't so a popular choice, but they took the risk and they will thrive, I'm sure, in the future with everything they're going to be exposed to. So yeah.
I mean, along with those projects, like you say, and also like we mentioned before, there was the tax landscape is also changing in Saudi. So it's currently, the tax regime is going through a number of reforms. So we're expecting some changes to, the income tax, the zakat regulations. And so again, being part of a jurisdiction that is going through some significant tax reforms can only mean good things for tax professionals. So.
Yeah, it's really exciting. We touched upon, did you ever think corporation tax would come to the UAE? So I always get asked this question, and I always say, no, it won't happen. But do you think personal income tax will be coming to the UAE anytime soon?
It is a good question. It's always asked, I think it's always in the back of everyone's minds. Oman are considering introducing personal taxation, so that's already well known. In terms of whether the UAE and other GCC countries will introduce it, will be yet to be seen. Okay. But the funny thing I did, I remember when corporate income tax the announcement was made, there's a question that was specifically asked to the Minister of Finance in terms of what's next. Will personal income tax ever be introduced? And reading into it, I think the answer was it's not on the table yet.
Oh, wow.
And that's where I kind of looked and thought, okay, maybe a change sometime in the future, but I don't know if it's going to be. I don't see it happening in the short term.
Okay.
But as you saw with corporate income tax being introduced, it's you could say it could be inevitable at some point.
So let's make our money now and retire, and then they can bring it in.
That's right.
So, okay, cool. So I just wanted to understand also, what are your views on tax technology? I know there's e-invoicing coming into play next year, but what does that mean in terms of tax technology? Are we there yet in this part of the world? I know it's already in existence in like more mature tax jurisdictions, but yeah, what's the future of tax technology here?
Yeah, I don't think we're completely there at this moment in time. Obviously, tax technology plays a great part in making sure improving, processes, making things more efficient in terms of making things obviously more accurate as well, right? In terms of when it comes to data collection and transportation to obviously the taxing authorities. So as of now, I still see businesses grappling with multiple Excel spreadsheets, right? Yeah. So, and also in terms of countless man hours being spent in terms of extracting data from various different sources, pulling it together, various errors being made. So now you can actually, have technology reduce a lot of that effort in terms of whether you build certain kind of robotics to basically extract information from various sources and pull it all together in a format that can be accurate and analyzed at a flick of a button. So I think, as we're looking at the rollout of UAE corporate tax, as organizations are doing corporate income tax assessments, tax technology is a big part to look at. So again, we're asking a lot of businesses the questions in terms of what is their infrastructure around, reporting, and how can we use tax technology in order to make things more efficient, more accurate, reduce time and cost that businesses are incurring as a result of not having tax technology. So it is definitely the future. We're not quite hit there with it right now. But again, as with anything tech, it will happen in the due course.
It's inevitable, I guess.
Exactly.
With AI especially. So you are having those conversations already?
Yeah.
Okay, cool, interesting. So in December last year, we hosted COP28 in Dubai. And obviously ESG is a hot topic. It's a really important topic for everybody globally. Are there any links between ESG and tax, and is that conversation happening now? Can you see that conversation happening in the UAE?
Yeah, for sure. I think, like I mentioned before, tax can change behavior, right? So, and that's why in many jurisdictions, you'll see ESG being part of the tax function in terms of the management of ESG of an organization. So you'll see a lot of head of tax that have a head of tax role and an ESG role. And the reason for that is in most jurisdictions, again, you do have certain green and incentivized tax credits for ESG matters. So whether you get carbon credits, whether it's kind of relief against, spend on environmentally friendly kind of assets. So you do see a lot of overlap. And there's also kind of a lot of reporting when it comes to ESG from a tax perspective as well. So ESG is going to become, I think, increasingly more important, and you'll start to see quite a lot of overlay between tax and ESG. So a lot of the in-house tax functions, a lot of the in-house tax, heads of taxes will need to kind of, pay attention to that and see what's happening in other markets, because I can sort of foresee that coming in the UAE in the short future. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so people generally don't like tax, but if we want to save the planet and, be sustainable, we have to start loving tax then, you've got to pay your tax,
That's
save
right,
the planet.
Yeah.
Cool, okay. Okay, so that wraps up the technical side of questions. I have a few personal questions to understand a bit more about Vishal. So can't really tell your age by the limited greys on your head, but I can see a few in the beard.
Yep.
But I'm assuming you're quite young. So at what age did you become partner, if you don't mind me asking? And how did you get to this point in your life where, you are a managing director, you're a tax practice leader at a young age?
Well, I don't know. At a young age, I definitely don't think I'm young anymore. But yeah, if I did have any hair, it would be grey. So you could definitely tell my age then. No, I mean, in terms of, my age now. In terms of when I made partner, I was 36 years old.
Okay,
so,
amazing.
I mean, in terms of how did I get to becoming a partner or an MD, it's... there's no kind of real answer to kind of give anyone around that. I think it's, I've always wanted to become a partner. I remember the first day when I had a graduate assessment program in the UK, when it was the first job, I did a presentation to another group of partners. And as part of that, it was, what was your 5, 10, 15-year goal? At the end of it, it was always partnership.
Amazing.
In-house roles have never really appealed to me so much, and that's because not because I don't think in terms of those roles will add any value or growth, but more so that I enjoy the variety of what I do. So I'm kind of jumping from project to project, different clients. So that has definitely helped. In terms of the journey, I think moving to the UAE, I've got to say, has definitely helped my kind of professional growth. When I moved across, I was a manager. So again, so that was about 9 years ago. And that was mainly being thrown into the deep end of things, and getting, like I said, exposure to so many, high-profile projects, high-profile transactions, high-profile clients, right? I wouldn't have been able to get that experience, I don't think, back in the UK, especially at such a lower grade, right? So getting that exposure here, I think, has made me become more of a well-rounded in terms of tax professional. I've experienced things that, often I'd be doing things when I was a manager that a director would be doing.
Oh, really?
Whereas in the UK, you'd never get that type of opportunity.
Okay.
So I definitely think, like we mentioned before, why should people think about moving to this region, and particularly Saudi? It can accelerate people's careers so much faster because it just exposes you to so much more different types of projects and making you out of your comfort zone at times. A lot of the times you are out of your comfort zone. But then you gain that experience, and then you learn from that experience, and then you apply it again. And the other aspect is really just, the development of individuals below you. Really, you can never really get to partnership without the support of the people above you, the people below you. So it's really about kind of working as a team. So I think it's, I don't think I'm that young anymore.
Yeah, but no, you should be really proud of yourself. You had a goal set out when you were 21, when you joined your first Big Four role, and here you are, you made partner and now you're MD. So yeah, you should take a pause and, congratulate yourself. You've done it. So what would Vishal say to a young 18-year-old Vishal, back then, starting your career? Any tips or any advice that you would give anyone out there who's starting their career, even if it's not in tax? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, if I was 18 again, I'd tell myself to invest in Bitcoin. So yeah. But no, I mean, in terms of when it comes to anyone starting out in their professional career, I mean, particularly those in tax, I think What I would say is make sure that you get a professional qualification
Okay.
early on in your career, right? And historically, over the last few years, there's not been many service providers that offer, tax relevant qualifications here locally. There's more now in terms of, the number of service providers that offer corporate tax, VAT diplomas, audit. So I would say if you're a graduate and you've just left university and you want to go in a career of tax, start that journey straight away, because that will give you a great foundation around understanding the principles of taxation, which you can then apply in your day-to-day roles as you're working with whichever firm that you work with. So that is probably one of the tips I'd say. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing this being a mandatory requirement for a lot of organisations.
Okay.
Again, when I go back to my time when I left university, I was at college for the first 3 years of, as I was studying and obviously working. Whereas here, again, you don't have that. So it's important that as taxes mature and the landscape changes, we do make sure that our individuals within the team have appropriate tax qualifications. And so getting that early on is, I'd suggest, is a good tip. The other point would be to try and get as much exposure to different areas of taxation. So again, I was quite fortunate in the UK where I had, experience of direct tax, indirect tax, transfer pricing, tax accounting. So anyone that's starting off a career in tax should try and at least get exposure across all the different taxes, and then start to choose which one you like. Right?
Yeah.
Everyone thinks of tax as being one tax. It's not. There's various different disciplines within taxation, and so it is important that individuals find what they like, whether that's kind of doing international tax advisory, whether that's doing M&A or just doing kind of domestic taxation. They all have different nuances. The projects are very different. So I'd always say try to get experience as much of the different types of taxes that you can, and then choose the one that you are most interested in.
How can one get multi-tax experience, especially from if they're in a big four? You're usually specialized into one area, and then when you're looking to move into an in-house role, the requirements are a more generalist profile, but candidates have that 10 years of indirect tax experience only. How can somebody get that multi-tax experience if they're in the big four?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, like I say, the Big Four are structured in a way that, you do often get pigeonholed into a specific team, and unless you specifically ask to move to a different team, you're kind of stuck in that team for a period of time. Although a number of graduate recruitment programs now give the option to rotate across a number of different service lines, and so that is, I think, important. And that's one way of kind of getting exposure early on. I mean, I myself, when I left university, I went and joined a top 20 UK firm before I went to one of the Big Four.
Okay.
So I got my first qualification, which was the ATT, in that top 20 accounting firm. And that was basically, again, there are a number of firms now kind of within the UAE market that effectively have smaller teams of individuals that would do different types of taxes and have more exposure to a broad range of taxes. So again, that's an option. And I think it goes back to actually my first day at H&M. We had a number of interns within, well, not interns, but graduates that had basically come into the organisation. And I'd asked the question of them because I was quite curious to say, okay, the two individuals had interned at a number of the Big Four firms here within the region. I said, so why did you choose A&M?
Yeah.
And it was for this specific reason, because they said, we're going to get so much more exposure in terms of working with senior leadership early on. We'd get so much exposure to other parts of the business. So we wanted a more of a generalist kind of position as opposed to kind of going into one of the large organisations and just working in one team and only being focused
that's really
on that one
good.
team.
Cool. So we touched upon, you getting to this position in your career. So, in order to be a leader like you are you one of those, 5 a.m. wake up calls, morning meditation? Is that what your day looks like, or what does your day typically look like?
Yeah, no, I'm a strong believer in the saying that says, the early bird catches the worm, right? So I do think, getting up early has so much more benefits. So I myself get up at 4:30 every morning.
Wow.
Yeah, it's quite early. Although that wasn't by choice initially, so it was forced upon because I had a young daughter that never really used to sleep that well. So, but I've stuck with it ever since. And I do think that helps. And if you look at a number of very successful people across the world, right? One of the common traits is that they do get up, quite early, in order to either whether that's kind of hitting the gym or kind of other stuff in terms of work. But I think it just means that you're able to get so much work done before other people wake up. So yeah, the usual day for me is really starting off early, usually between 4:30 or 5 a.m. I try to go to the gym now and then.
Amazing.
When I can. And then it's really just getting straight into work. So I'll drop my daughter off at school and then go into work and then get going with the day straight away. Okay. So it's, that would.
Okay. So 5 a.m. wake ups equals leader.
Oh yeah. I wouldn't say, I don't think it's what time you get up or what time you go to sleep that will make you a good leader. I think what makes someone a good leader is someone that basically is invested in other people, right? Yeah. And so it's all about, in terms of leading by example, it's being on the front line. So it's making sure that you're there protecting your team, you're directing, you're guiding them, you're developing them. So I think one of the most important traits is also the leader not just focusing on their own goals, right, or the goals of an organization. It's focusing on the goals of your team and giving. I think a good leader creates more leaders, and that's where I think that's the focus. It's not just getting up at 4:30 in the morning.
No, definitely. I have no doubt that you are a great leader, and it makes sense why your team is so strong right now. You definitely, I can imagine you being a great leader. So, final few questions, a bit more fun questions. So, what is your favorite way to spend the weekend?
Apart from reading the guidance released on
exactly.
Friday, I don't know. My favourite way is, so Saturdays are normally reserved for daddy-daughter days. So nice. That's when I become a big kid, and I'm at various trampoline parks or the play areas around Dubai, spending time with her. And then Sunday is really just family day and catching up with friends. So weekends are quite chilled.
Cool. Any favourite restaurants right now that you've been to, new restaurants that you can, share with us?
That's a good question. It's a hard one because you can probably tell I do like food, right? So, I'll probably have a favourite restaurant for a particular cuisine.
Okay.
But if I was to choose one, I'd probably say it'd probably be Zuma in DIFC. Okay. I think, you can often tell a good restaurant when it's been around for quite some time and it's always hard to get a table. And so, I'd say Zuma's probably the best.
So if we're trying to catch you for a meeting, we'll find you in Zuma.
Exactly, Business lunch is in Zuma.
Okay, so we're in January. Have you got any New Year's resolutions that you'd like to share with us?
In terms of, no, I used to kind of put resolutions down. Now I don't really look at resolutions. Again, obviously my focus for this year is continue building out, the practice and the team. So that will be my main focus for the year ahead.
Okay, amazing. So thank you for joining us on today's podcast. We're really excited to have you on, and we've got a small gift for you from the Alchemy team.
Oh, thank you.
So this is our famous Alchemy basket. So small thank you.
That's much appreciated.
Thanks, Vishal.
Cheers.